Have you ever entered a room and felt its energy shift before anyone even said a word? Have you ever found yourself disarmed by someone who didn't speak, but whose silence held the weight of 1,000 thoughts? Have you ever realized, too late, that the quietest person in the room was the one holding all the power? Welcome to Stoic and Still, a place where we don't just chase wisdom, we embody it. Where stillness is not emptiness, it's control. Where silence is not surrender, it's precision. If you're ready to stop reacting and start ruling your inner world, you've come to the right place. In a world obsessed with noise, where speaking louder is mistaken for confidence and reacting faster is seen as power, there is something profoundly disruptive about someone who does neither. Someone who chooses silence, not out of fear, but out of awareness, out of discipline, out of strength. This isn't about being passive. This is about being intentional. And no one understood that better than Friedrich Nietzsche. He saw through the games people play, the way they talk, not to connect, but to control. The way they argue, not to learn, but to dominate. The way they fill every silence with empty words, terrified of what might rise to the surface if the noise stopped. And he realized something most never dare to admit. Those who always need to speak are the ones with the least control. Because the moment you feel the need to explain yourself, to justify your worth, to prove your value through words, you've already lost the advantage. You've stepped into their arena, played by their rules, and handed over your most powerful weapon, your calm. Nietzsche understood this. He believed that silence, when chosen, when owned, was not a lack of communication. It was a higher language altogether, a language that didn't seek approval, a language that didn't plead to be understood, a language that simply was. Think about it. The strongest trees don't shout while growing. The deepest waters don't announce their depth. And the most grounded humans, the ones who can shift the entire tone of a room, rarely need to raise their voice. They understand that energy doesn't lie, that presence doesn't need punctuation, that power, true power, can be silent. So why do most people fear silence? Because it reveals what words usually hide. When you remain quiet, others are forced to listen to themselves, to hear their own insecurities echo, to feel their own energy collapse in the absence of yours. And that for many is unbearable. And yet, this is where your strength begins. Not in defending your point, not in proving you're right, but in standing still while the world rushes to fill the void you've left open. And in that space, in that perfectly timed silence, you gain the clearest view of who's really in control. Not them, you. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a conversation where the more you spoke, the more power you seemed to lose? Have you ever walked away from an argument feeling like you said everything and still lost something? If so, maybe it's time to reverse the formula. Maybe it's time to stop thinking of silence as weakness and start using it as strategy. Because the people who win aren't the ones who dominate the conversation. They're the ones who know when to let the silence do the work. Nietzsche wasn't interested in helping you fit in. He wanted you to wake up, to realize that power doesn't live in being louder. It lives in being unshakable. And that begins, not when you speak, but when you stop needing to. This is just the beginning of understanding that silence isn't something you fall into. It's something you choose. And when you learn how to choose it, you change ever. The world has taught us that to stay silent is to lose. That if we do not defend ourselves, we will be overrun. That if we do not speak up, we will be forgotten. And that if we do not respond, others will write the narrative for us. It's a seductive belief, because in the heat of confrontation, in the grip of rising emotion, reacting feels like taking back control. But that's the trap. The moment you react, without awareness, without stillness, without sovereignty, you are no longer operating from your center. You are responding from a wound. And whoever triggered you, they now own the conversation. They lead, you follow. They provoke, you perform. You are dancing to their music without even realizing the tune is not yours. Nietzsche called this the morality of the herd. The state of being so tethered to external validation that you mistake reaction for truth, agreement for belonging, and attention for respect. He saw clearly that most people aren't truly engaging with reality. They're engaging with their fears, trying desperately to preserve a sense of identity in a world that challenges them at every turn. And when someone challenges that identity by criticizing, by confronting, by ignoring, it feels unbearable. There's something that happens when you stop reacting. At first, it feels unnatural. You want to interrupt, to explain, to set the record straight. But when you don't, when you simply hold your stillness and breathe through the urge, you begin to see what you never saw before. You notice how quickly people fill the silence, how their words begin to spiral, their tone grows uncertain, their gaze shifts. It's as if your silence has turned into a mirror they weren't prepared to face. And what that mirror reflects is themselves. That is the psychology of silence. You see, most people don't speak because they have something meaningful to say. They speak to manage their own discomfort, their own insecurity, their own fear of being exposed. They speak to protect a fragile image, one they've spent years building and maintaining. They fill the air with noise because silence feels too much like vulnerability, too much like being seen. But when you withhold your reaction, when you do not rush to fill the space, you invite something deeper to unfold. You shift the balance of power, because now they are left alone with themselves. And for many, that is terrifying. Modern psychology confirms what Nietzsche intuited long ago, that in moments of conflict or pressure, the human brain searches desperately for feedback. A smile, a nod, a reaction, anything to confirm control of the interaction. Without it, the mind spirals. It begins to assume, to fear, to project. Are they judging me? Do they know I'm bluffing? Why aren't they saying anything? This spiral isn't random, it's neurological. When someone speaks and you do not respond, their brain interprets that absence as uncertainty or threat. The amygdala activates, the nervous system tightens, and in that moment, they lose their center. And you remain still. This is not manipulation. It is awareness. The awareness that silence, when grounded in calm presence, is not emptiness. It is dominance without aggression, strength without resistance, influence without effort. Nietzsche understood that silence isn't just a gap between words, it's a pressure point, and when you apply it at the right moment, with full presence and no emotional leak, it can dismantle masks more powerfully than any confrontation ever could. But that power must be used with integrity, because silence isn't always strength. When used unconsciously, it can become a form of avoidance, a shield for fear. But when chosen deliberately, rooted in clarity and calm, it becomes something entirely different. It becomes a signal, a silent message that says, I don't need to defend myself. I'm not here to prove anything. I see more than I show. And people feel that. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. They become more careful with their words, more aware of their own posture, more alert to your gaze. Because your silence isn't passive. It's charged with presence. And in a world that moves at the speed of reaction, that kind of presence is rare and deeply unsettling. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where someone is trying to provoke you, rush you, control the pace, pause. Don't respond immediately. Let them sit in their own urgency. Let your silence ask the questions your words don't need to. Let your breath become your response. You'll be amazed at how much people reveal when you simply give them the space to collapse into their own performance. And you? You won't need to say much, because the person who sees through it all rarely needs to explain a thing. You'll walk away from those moments not drained, but intact. clear, strong, and in control, not of them but of yourself. And that is the kind of power that no one can take from you. If you've ever experienced this shift, this quiet moment where your presence changed the room more than your words ever could, I'd love to hear it. Drop a story, even a single sentence, in the comments. And if this message speaks to you in a way the world's noise never could, please consider subscribing. That small action helps this channel grow, but more importantly, it tells me you're walking this path too. Let's continue forward, quietly, but with purpose. True power is rarely loud. It doesn't demand, it doesn't chase, it doesn't explain itself in desperate attempts to be seen. True power waits, it listens, it observes, and then, when the moment is right, it moves with intention, not impulse. And this is the wisdom Nietzsche hinted at over and over again. He didn't just ask us to think differently, he dared us to be different, to step outside the herd, to stop reacting like everyone else, to stop letting the world decide who we should be, and instead, create ourselves from the inside out. That, right there, is psychological positioning. Most people don't realize they're playing a game. They walk into a room, into a relationship, into a challenge, already reacting, already giving away their position, already adjusting themselves based on the energy of others. They don't walk in grounded in who they are. They walk in trying to find it in someone else's eyes. And that's why they're easy to read, easy to shake, easy to manipulate. But you're going to learn how to hold your position, not with ego, not with coldness, but with quiet certainty, the kind of certainty that comes from knowing, I don't need to prove my presence, because I am present. I don't need to take the spotlight, because my energy already speaks. I don't need to control the room, because I control myself. When you enter a space with that level of alignment, everything changes. People respond differently. They feel something they can't quite explain. They lower their voice when speaking to you. They hesitate before making assumptions. They become careful because they don't know where you stand. And when they can't place you, they can't control you. This is what Nietzsche meant by becoming who you are. Not in a reactive way, but through radical self-definition, through conscious stillness, through an unwavering internal compass that doesn't tilt based on someone else's weather. And yes, this takes practice. You'll be tempted to explain yourself, to clear up misunderstandings, to prove your intentions. But every time you give in to that temptation, ask yourself, am I doing this to connect or to control their opinion of me? Because if it's the second, you've already stepped off center. There is an art to saying less and becoming more, to removing your energy from places where it's not respected, to watching the storm swirl and choosing not to step into it. It's not detachment, it's elevation. It's not coldness, it's clarity. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. So the next time someone tries to bait you into a reaction, remember, the strongest move is often no move at all. Let them wonder, let them guess, let them feel the emptiness where your reaction used to be. That space, that mystery, that silence. It holds more authority than any well-rehearsed defense. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your stillness. You don't need to make your energy accessible to those who don't treat it with care. You don't need to explain your silence to those who only value noise. Instead, carry your presence like a sovereign, calm, clear, untouchable. And when someone finally asks, "Why didn't you say anything?" you can smile softly and answer, "Because I didn't need to." That moment, that calm clarity, is the difference between performing power and owning it. If this speaks to you, share what moment in your life taught you the value of stillness. Was there a time you remained calm when others expected a storm? Comment your experience below. Someone might need to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe. It tells me you're part of this quiet movement, and you're ready to walk with strength that doesn't shout. There is a moment in your journey when you realize that becoming powerful isn't about adding more titles, more knowledge, more noise, but rather about subtracting, removing the need to explain, the urge to be liked, the compulsion to prove anything to anyone. Because true mastery doesn't arrive with fanfare, it arrives in silence, in the space between what you feel and how you respond, in that sacred pause where most people collapse, but you remain whole. This is the art of presence. And presence is not simply being in a room. It's not posture or breath or silence alone. Presence is an energy, a frequency, a signal that radiates not because you try, but because you have nothing to hide. You are not playing a part. You are not grasping for control. You are simply there, unshaken, undistracted, unmoved by the chaos others create, because you have already confronted your own. You no longer need the world to validate your silence, because you have learned to find peace within it. And in doing so, you shift from performer to master. Nietzsche wrote often of the Übermensch, not a man of arrogance or brute force, but of inner elevation. A being who creates their own values, who stands beyond the moral conditioning of the herd, and who answers not to fear or flattery, but to a higher truth forged within. This being does not need to dominate others because they have already conquered themselves, and the one who conquers himself becomes untouchable. You've likely met people like this, the ones who walk into a room and say little, yet the room reshapes around them. Not because of what they project, but because of what they withhold. They do not compete for attention, they redirect it. Not with flash, but with depth. Not with charm, but with gravity. Their power isn't visible, it's felt. Why? Because they carry something most people never develop. Sovereignty. Not the kind granted by birthright or title, but the kind earned in solitude, built in silence, hardened through disappointment, refined by restraint. They have sat in the fire of rejection without begging to be rescued. They have watched people misjudge them and chose not to correct it. They have learned that clarity does not always require conversation, and that often the most powerful rebuttal is none at all. Can you do that? Can you let someone misunderstand you and stay centered? Can you feel the pull to defend and still choose stillness? Can you watch the drama unfold and resist the urge to step in? Because if you can, you are free. Free from the addiction to being understood. Free from the game of reaction. Free from the illusion that noise equals power. And once you taste that freedom, you will never again give your energy away so easily. The truth is, people test your boundaries not just with what they say, but with how you react. They throw out small hooks, waiting to see if you'll bite. A sideways comment, a dismissive tone, a challenge disguised as a joke. And in those moments, the weak feel the need to respond, but the master sees the game and refuses to play. He doesn't rise to every invitation. She doesn't perform for every audience. They do not measure their worth by how quickly they can clap back, but by how deeply they can remain still. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean retreat. It means dominance through clarity. Stillness doesn't mean fear. It means you've seen this before and you're no longer impressed. And detachment doesn't mean coldness. It means you've mastered the art of not bleeding for people who wouldn't stop your wound. If these words resonate with something you've lived through or are living through now, tell me about it in the comments. You don't need to explain everything, just write, "I choose presence over performance," or share your own line of truth. Your words may echo into someone else's strength, and if this message feels like a mirror for the path you're already walking, quiet, focused, intentional, subscribe. You're not alone in choosing this way. You're part of a different kind of movement, the kind that doesn't scream for power because it already holds it. You've walked through the fire of restraint. You've tasted the discomfort of silence. You've looked power in the eye, Not the kind that screams, but the kind that waits, that watches, that knows. And now, you are no longer playing by the rules of the world that raised you. You are writing your own. Because when you no longer react the way people expect, you become unreadable. And in a world addicted to quick labels and instant control, being unreadable is a superpower. People can't manipulate what they can't predict. They can't intimidate what they can't understand. They can't dominate what doesn't flinch. And when you carry this energy, not as performance but as your natural state, you become unforgettable. Not because you're loud, but because your silence is heavy. Not because you're everywhere, but because your absence is felt. Not because you demand attention, but because you no longer need it. And this is where Nietzsche's deepest truth quietly lands. Not in dominance, not in proving superiority, but in the transformation of your inner world so completely that the outer world loses its grip on you. You no longer chase power, you are power. You no longer seek validation, you embody it. You no longer beg to be seen, you see yourself. And those who once tried to provoke you, to test you, to pull you into their storm of chaos, now find themselves disarmed, because there is nothing more threatening to the manipulator than someone they cannot read, someone who responds not with fear, nor anger, nor flattery, but with calm, with curiosity, with a quiet smile that says, "I see what you're doing, and I choose not to play." That choice, that freedom, that psychological autonomy is the final stage of mastery. It's no longer about outsmarting others to win. It's about being so internally aligned that you have nothing left to prove. And in that space, you begin to attract others who are also walking the silent path. No longer drawn to noise, no longer seeking rescue, no longer distracted by superficial charm, but moving softly yet powerfully toward depth, meaning, clarity. You become a mirror for others to rise, not by instructing them, but by embodying what they've forgotten they could be. And in that way, you leave an imprint, a ripple, a presence that lingers long after you've gone. So today, if this message resonates, pause with me here. Take a breath. Ask yourself, where in my life do I still perform? Who do I still shrink for? What part of me still seeks to be understood rather than to be free? And if the answers come gently, don't push them away. Just notice. Because awareness is where power begins. And then, when you're ready, make a quiet vow to yourself. Not to be louder, not to be tougher, but to be truer to yourself, to your energy, to the unshakable presence within you that has waited far too long to be remembered. If this final reflection touched something deep inside you, I invite you to comment. Not for me, but for you. Say it out loud. Write it down. I choose truth over performance. Or simply, I no longer need to be read to be real. And if this journey through silence and strength has stirred something in your spirit, subscribe to this channel. Not for numbers, but because you know we're building something quiet here, something powerful, and this path, you're not walking it alone. From this moment forward, speak less, be more. Let your silence terrify the shallow. Let your presence restore the real. And may your path be so rooted, so aligned, that no storm can move you again.